Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. On this channel, we talk about problems people face in their day-to-day lives. Let's start with a video.
My husband and I are now married for almost 26 years, and we've been head over heels in love with each other. We have 2 kids, a daughter and a son. He has been a very loving and caring husband and father. But when he makes up his mind about something, he does not want to see anybody interfering, and that probably left our relationship ruined after years. Our daughter had gone for her master's abroad when my husband shared that he wanted our daughter to get married to his friend's son. I told him that he was a great guy and they would look amazing together, but it depended on our daughter. My husband said that he was his dad, and why would he make a bad decision for his daughter? I told him that he should pray that his daughter likes the guy because there was no other way, and if our daughter didn't agree, we couldn't force her. My husband was not ready to listen and said that I would have to let him handle it and would not interfere. I asked my husband what he was going to do if she already was involved with someone, and this enraged him, and he yelled that no one could be better than his friend's son. I did not forward this news to my daughter, and as I did not want to stress her out, my daughter was supposed to arrive back after 2 months. When my daughter came back, my husband threw a party and invited family and close friends, and that friend's family was also invited. I warned my husband that he could not decide everything by himself and had to ask his daughter first. My husband told me that it was just a party and he wanted our daughter to interact with the family. Party went well and our kids enjoyed it all. My daughter was interacting randomly and I could not see her taking interest in a particular person, but my husband could not stop telling me that he could see the chemistry between the two. I told him to stop being crazy and asked him to talk to his daughter directly. We were having breakfast the next day and our son had already left for his university. My husband asked our daughter what she had planned about getting married. She told us that she had no plans then and wanted to focus on her career. She went on and said that she had a lot of time to think about that and would inform us if she ever had a plan. My husband told her that he was deciding to get her married to his friend's son. My daughter was stunned and told us that it was her life and she was going to decide on her life partner, and the guy my husband was talking about was not at all like someone she would want to marry. I could see my husband losing his temper when he asked what was wrong with the guy. Our daughter told him that he was a very different guy and they had nothing in common between them, and also that she was already dating someone. My husband rose from his seat and told her that she was going to get married to his friend's son, and that too within 2 months. That evening, my daughter went to her dad and told him that if he tried to force her, she would leave the house and would never come back. My husband told her that his friend had helped her in setting up the business he had, and he had promised him to marry our daughter to his son. He lost his cool and told our daughter that he was going to remove her from the will and prayed that she would end up on the streets. My daughter got really hurt and went to her room to pack her stuff. I was so pissed and could not believe it was my husband who was ready to sacrifice his daughter for a promise that he made to his friend. I knew I had to intervene and went to talk to our daughter. I told her that I would find a way as I already had a plan. She told me that she was not going to stay and left with her stuff. My husband was understandably enraged and refused to speak to anyone for several days. After a week or so, when our daughter had not contacted us, he informed me that he was going to remove her from his will and that he needed to consult with his lawyer. I told him he was correct and that our daughter deserved nothing and pretended to agree with his decision. After a few days, I asked my husband why he wouldn't give me half of the will instead of all of it to our son. He told me that it was a better idea and he would do the same. At this point, you'll be thinking that I was being a wicked mom and wanted whatever was meant for our daughter, but I am doing all this for her. I'm just waiting for my husband to transfer the will to me, and will keep you guys updated. My husband added me to his will and gave me the right to half of his assets. His will was updated and our daughter was removed from it. I asked him how he could be so ruthless, and he said that our daughter had to think before taking such a step. I had decided that I would file for divorce once he would add me to his will, but I had so many questions regarding the divorce and the will. I consulted the family lawyer and asked him if my husband could remove me from the will after I had filed for divorce. He told me that he could, but it was a difficult procedure as some of the changes might require approval by the family court before any changes could be made. I talked to my son and discussed the whole situation. He agreed that his dad was acting harshly and could not treat our daughter like that, and told me that he would support me with whatever I had planned. I became even more confident and went to my husband to inform him that I was going to file for divorce. He was stunned and couldn't believe me. I told him that I was going to leave the house right away and was going to shift to my parents' house that I had inherited. I had moved to my parents' house and called my daughter several times, but she didn't respond. I left a message that I had left her dad's house and was at my parents' house so she could stay with me. My daughter called me and told me that she was coming and would stay with me. My husband called me and told me that I was being kiddish and had to give up on whatever I was doing. I told him that I was going to divorce him, no matter even if he was able to remove me from the will, as I didn't care at all. He told me that I had to come back so we could sort things out. I said that if I was coming back, my daughter was coming back with me. My husband hung up. My son called me and said that if Dad did not give up, he would join us and would leave his dad's house too. He said that he was going to talk to his dad and would try to convince him to be a little kind. My son went to his dad and told him that he was being ridiculous and would be left alone if he did not give up on his decision. My son later packed his stuff and came to stay with us. I guess this will put enough pressure on him to stop being a jerk. My husband called me a few days later and told me that he was ready to give up and would not force our daughter to marry someone that she didn't want to. I told him that he had to think about it because if he did something like that again, I would not call him but would go to the court straight. I told him that I was just not filing for the divorce as I believed that we could handle the situation and my kids would not have to suffer, but if he kept on being an idiot, I would teach him a lesson. I told my husband that if he wanted us to come back, he had to call his friend and tell him that he could not marry our daughter to his son, as she was already interested in someone else. My husband said that it would be like insulting his friend, to which I replied that he was still not ready to understand anything and needed more time alone. I told him that we would return as soon as he would call his friend and told him that there was no such promise anymore. My husband called and told me that we would go to his friend's house and would apologize for not keeping the promise. I told him that he was being absurd and senseless. I asked him that if it was so hard for him, I could call his friend and tell him that we could not force our kids for some stupid promise. My husband told me that I could not do it, but I knew that it had to be done. I called the friend and told him that my husband could not keep his promise as we could not force our daughter. I went on and said that our daughter was already seeing someone and she was the one who was going to make decisions for her life. I bet that friend had called my husband, and I do not care what my husband had said to him because I had already cleared the air. We would be moving back to my husband's place because we belong there, and if he had any problem next time, I'll make sure to show him the way to the outside. NTA, you are a hero, woman. It was so overwhelming to know that you took a stand for your kids and did not let your idiot husband take control. The way you planned everything just to protect your daughter was amazing. Moms like you never let kids feel left out or miserable when such dads decide to ruin their lives. The way you told me that you were going back to your husband and would deal with him the way he does is incredible. NTA, the only a-hole is OP's husband, who had no sense and was ready to sacrifice his daughter for a meaningless promise he'd made with his friend. Even if his friend had helped him with his business, that never meant that he could trade his daughter in return. The way OP took a stand was commendable, and loved the way she told that friend herself because the husband was never going to.
Next story.
My wife and I have just had a baby, and my wife won't let my parents see the baby until her mother does. My wife and her mom used to be very close, but 3 months into the pregnancy, her mother passed away. It was very sudden but peaceful in her sleep. My wife was devastated, which was to be expected because they would talk all the time about the baby and how excited they were. The issue started closer to the delivery date. My wife and my mom are close as well, obviously not as close as she is with her own mother, and so she had invited my mom to be in the delivery room with her. When her mother died, she told my mom that she didn't think it was fair if she was there when her own mother couldn't be. My mom was understanding, and so was I. Then she said that she wanted to name the baby after her mother if it was a girl. Her mother had a very unique but pretty name, so I gave in to that demand as well. Now we have had the baby. It's a girl, and I love my daughter so much. I'm so proud of my wife for going through this even after the loss she faced. Now, this is the issue. My side of the family has been trying to meet the baby, and my wife won't allow it. She says her mother has to meet the baby first. What she means by this is that she wants to take the baby to visit her mother's grave. This wouldn't be a big deal if her mother was buried in our country. My wife's family is African, and so when her mother died, she flew the body back and had her buried in her home country because that's what her mother wanted. Due to COVID and the healing process, my wife won't be able to travel with the baby for the next 3 to 6 months at least. This means that my family won't meet my child until she's almost a year old when they live just 30 minutes away. I tried to explain to my wife how absurd and unfair this demand is, but she said what's unfair is that my family will have the rest of their lives with our daughter, while her mother will likely only meet the baby once because the flight is expensive and long, and she doesn't go back to Africa often, once every 5 to 7 years. I told her that with the way she was acting, I didn't trust her to take the baby out of the country, especially because she won't let me go with them. She says this is between 3 generations of women in her family and that she just wants to spend time with her mom and her daughter. When I implied I wouldn't let her leave with the baby, she blew up at me, called me an a-hole, and said that she would divorce me if I ever tried to control her like that again. I love my family, and I know she's grieving, but I would be lying if I said I was comfortable with the situation. So, AITA? NTA, your wife is grieving, and that's understandable, but she's gone over the line of what is reasonable for grieving. Telling her she can't leave the country with the baby without you is also not a matter of controlling her. It's a matter of not letting her make a unilateral decision about a child the two of you share. She can do whatever she wants. She can't just decide to do whatever she wants with a shared child. Maybe a therapist could help her here? I don't really see this being something you're able to just solve on your own. NAH. Your wife seems to be suffering from some mental health issues and probably postpartum depression. You should get her medical care immediately. In the meantime, of course, you should have your family meet the baby. Your wife doesn't get to say no to that. You also should not allow your wife to take the baby to Africa without you ever. But also, babies shouldn't be on planes until they're at least a year old.
Next story.
I'm a 22-year-old woman, and my grandmother, 65, is a horrible person. She, white, is a racist person who was married to my black grandfather and treated her children differently depending on their skin color. And even so, she was a person who let her children go hungry, all having to spend on the basics of the grocery. My grandfather had an excellent financial condition, but she didn't allow him to have excess expenses with it. My dad is one of her least favorites, but I'm her favorite granddaughter, the whitest. Half of her children don't talk to her anymore for a number of reasons. She has chosen money several times instead of helping her children. My uncle has had an accident and needed my grandmother to stay with my cousin for 1 hour, and she refuses until he pays for the babysitting. She has already filed false criminal complaints, several times contested, to take money from his children. And she always treated everyone very badly, family or not. My father is the only one who helps. Despite my grandmother having conditions to pay, she was constantly asking for money for basic things, which she had. My grandparents needed care from a nurse or technician because my grandfather had dementia, my grandmother has no leg and is blind, diabetes. And honestly, my grandmother did not go to the nursing home because my grandfather was always wonderful and the children always insisted on paying a good nurse for him and, consequently, for her. My grandfather passed away 6 months ago due to stroke. He finally had his rest, and all the children decided that it would be so much cheaper, easier, and less trouble if my grandmother went to a nursing home. It's not a bad nursing home, one of the most luxurious in the city, but still cheaper than the 2 nurses who were hired. I visit her every week to take her soup, and as usual, she was complaining about how her children left her in the asylum, that how could they leave a mother there and not want to pay the nurses? She can afford it. I usually don't say anything, but when my grandmother talked about how my father is an ungrateful man who turned his back and never appreciated his mother, my father was the only one who insisted on a more luxurious and overpaid nursing home. I said, "Grandma, you yourself are the reason you were dumped in the asylum, not your ungrateful children." She got nervous and started screaming. I was asked to leave and learned from my father that she had to take medication for being so nervous. My father says I was very hard on her, especially for her delicate health, and told me to apologize. But I don't know if I want to. AITA? NTA. She's lucky she's where she's at. She's a grown-ass woman and should be able to hear the truth about herself. She's overreacting, and you're absolutely right. She put herself in this situation for being a racist. No one else's fault. Honestly, screw your racist grandma. She wants to talk about how she was wrong, but will not hold herself accountable for the harm that she's caused. I do the same thing. She was just shocked that her favorite whiter granddaughter is calling her out.